The first thing that everyone will have noticed is that there's been new versioning across the entire toolbox range. So instead of PHPStorm 11, we now have PHPStorm 2016.1. This is basically so that we can unify the version numbers across the entire platform. So we have a number of IDEs across the entire platform. So we've got IDEs for PHP, for Python, for Ruby, for Java. We've got all these different IDEs, but they're all built on a specific platform, on the same core platform. So what we've decided to do is, in order for us to actually understand exactly what's going on and which versions of things are making it into each version. I'm sorry, I just had to mute you there, Anna. My apologies. I could hear your mic coming through my ears. Right, back to it. In order for us to unify the versioning across all of the Toolbox products, what we've decided to do is to have a unified version system, which composes of the year and then the release number in this year. This helps us to know exactly which releases from the platform has made it into each version. Previously, we had problems where we didn't know whether bits of the platform were in PHPStorm 14 or they were in IntelliJ 6 or they were in PyCharm 15. So this really helps us to understand which versions of all of our software are out in the wild. So nothing to be scared of. 2016.1 just means it's 2016 and this is our first release of that year. So there's been a number of improvements in 2016.1, and what I like to do first is to focus on what's kind of the most important improvements for us, because we're PHP developers after all, and those are the PHP language improvements. Obviously, with the recent release of PHP 7 into the wild, then we have a number of different improvements around PHP 7, but also some more generic improvements. So the first thing that has been introduced into PHPStorm 2016.1 is support for PHP 7's group use statements. So at this point, me talking with slides is not really any use anymore. So what we should do is to take a look at PHPStorm and let's see these improvements as they come up. So with all luck, you should now be able to see PHPStorm. And you can see here that this is the Symfony component HTTP kernel. This is a very widely used component in the wild. This is a Symfony component, but it's used in many, many projects, like a lot of PHP components are. And this HTTP kernel is the backbone of a lot of other projects. Drupal 8, Laravel use this HTTP kernel. Obviously, the Symfony frameworks, they all use this HTTP kernel. And you can see that there's a ton of use statements here to pull in all the other components from not only within HTTP kernel itself, but the HTTP foundation, the dependency injection container, and some that are not even in the component namespace, bridge, proxy manager. And this, for me, is actually not a problem, but PHP 7 has introduced a way that we can group these use statements together to make things a little bit less verbose and a little bit easier to read. And this version of PHPStorm has introduced a way that we can quickly and easily do this. So what we need to do here, if we wanted to, for example, group together all of the dependency injection namespaces, all we need to do is to fire off the intentions browser using Alt and Enter, and that gives us a list of things that PHPStorm can do on this piece of code that the caret is positioned over. So now we can say group use statements by selected prefix. This actually means the prefix that I actually have the cursor over, the caret over, not anything else. And you'll see that if I press Enter, we've grouped all of the classes in the dependency injection namespace into this new PHP 7 group use style use import. And we can do that on other things. So we can group in all of the HTTP kernel by doing the same thing, Alt Enter, group use statements by selected prefix. So that's quite nice. We can also undo these by Alt and Enter over the group statement and then split selected group use statement, which is also very nice. And then we can also go right back to the beginning and group everything by component. And you can see that everything has been grouped together now that's in the Symfony component namespace. If we pick one of these and group them, let's pick one without very much. Request and response is nice. So we can group HTTP Foundation, request and response together. If I now find where request is used in this, in fact, let's go back up to the top and let's remove request. So now we have a problem with our code because we haven't imported Symfony component HTTP Foundation request. So if I go back down to where this is used, you can see there's a problem here. PHPStorm is already telling me that this isn't imported. If I import the class and we want Symfony component HTTP Foundation request, and again, I just used Alt and Enter to get all the intentions that we can do on this piece of code. Okay, we've imported that. If we go back up to the top, you can see that it's honored the group use statement that we've used. So if these are already grouped, all of the previous intentions and refactorings around namespaces will already honor those groups if you've grouped it. And I see a question, which is a very good question, asking about wrapping. At the moment, there is no actual standard around wrapping, so we haven't actually implemented any default wrapping yet. And there's a PSR from the Framework and Interoperability Group, which is looking at introducing coding standards for PHP 7. And as soon as one of those standards is passed, we'll obviously update the PSR code style so that it'll honor the wrapping that should be in the group use statement. At the moment, there isn't a standard, so we don't honor it. That's the group use statement. Are there any more questions quickly while I move back to my presentation? No? Okay, cool. Well, you feel free to ask questions later on if you're taking time typing them. I'll try my best to actually come back and find all the questions as I go along. So if you're asking questions about things that are previous to what I'm talking about, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry. So next up, we've got another refactoring, which is the make static refactoring, and this is brand new in this version of PHPStorm. This can be very useful. On the other hand, there's a very limited, narrow kind of use case for this, but we'll take a look anyway. So let's take a look at PHPStorm again, and let's change a project to something that's a bit more useful here. So if we open make static here, this is not. Okay, so let's remove this from being static and make it really simple in the short term. So let's just say we have this very simple class here. And all it does is it gets a formatted date. And the date should be, let's say, year, month, day, because I'm British. Although that's, we always need to make sure the month and the day are separate like that. So this is a really simple function that we can use. But in this instance, because there's no reliance on any of the other methods or properties inside that class, this is kind of pointless, this being an actual real class with a public method. So this is a precedent for somewhere where you would want to make this function static. So this is easily accomplished. We can just go to the refactor menu and say make static. And literally all this does in this really, really simple example is to add the keyword static into the function declaration, which is not particularly useful, but these very simple functions are the kind of prime candidacy for being made static. So if we undo that, and then let's say that we want to make this a little more complicated. So let's say that we would like to be able to update the date from within the context of this class. So I'm going to use Control-T to bring up the refactor this menu. And then I'm going to turn this into a field, which is just a property of the class. And I'd like it to be a field, yes, please, and a private field. And we'll call it date format. And then hit OK. And you can see that this is a nice little minor refactoring that PHPStorm gives us right out of the box. So now this is a bit more of a complex thing to make static because we're reliant on a property of this class. But we can do it anyway. So let's go to the refactor menu. Notice I have to put the caret on the name of the function I wish to refactor to be static. And then I go to refactor and then make static. So there's two ways that PHPStorm will now let us to make this method static. The first thing we can do is we can add an instance of this object into the function as a parameter with the name instance. So if this is like really hard to explain, but when you actually see what's happened in the code, this is a lot easier to understand. So let's hit refactor. And you can see now what happens is that we pass in an instance of this class, which we can then use to access the property. In this instance, this wouldn't actually work because it's a private property, but if this was a public property, everything would be fine. So this wouldn't actually work in this instance, so we need another way to do it. What we then need to do is, if I undo that refactoring, is we can just pass this date format in as a parameter into get formatted date. And we can do that also from the make static refactor. So instead of adding the object as a parameter, let's add the parameter. Let's add the field as a parameter, and we'll call it $date format. And if we refactor, this is a much more sane refactoring. As you can see, we can actually now just pass in the string that would be the date format, and then call the date and return it. So that's a very, very simple. That's a very, very simple example of how you could use make static in the real world, obviously. There's a question, is there this method can be static hint? I think IntelliJ has this. Not presently. Java is statics are much more useful in a Java environment, in my opinion, than they are in PHP, and it's very difficult to predict which classes should be static and which shouldn't. I'm not a big fan of statics personally in its entirety. There are very good use cases for statics, in my opinion. I think things like where you don't want to have to inject a logger into every single class that needs to log in your application, then a static can be a very useful way of achieving that. But I wouldn't like to think that the IDE would be prompting you to make things static. Statics make things very difficult to test, in my experience. So there's any more questions? The other question I've had, which is a very good question, is I'm more for changing statics to non-statics. Is it possible to do this the other way around? Not presently. We should probably look at seeing if that is possible, though, because that's a really cool thing. Obviously, the easiest way to do that is just to remove the static keyword, which everything would still work, but I get what you're saying. Okay, let's go back. So next up, we've got some more refactoring tools. These recent releases of PHPStorm have been really about trying to help developers make their daily life easier. That's really the key. They've been sort of evolution, not revolution. So lots of changes to try and help developers perform better every day. And this is a really nice little refactoring that I've actually used a few times since 2016.1 has been released. So let's take a look. So if we look at this piece of code here, you can see that what we've got here is a very simple yet convoluted if-else statement. Excuse me while I take a quick drink. I burnt my mouth, never mind. So what we can see here is a very convoluted if then else basically statement. And we've introduced a few refactorings around these kind of situations. The first thing you can do, and again, we access all of these intentions by pressing Alt and then Enter, is we can flip this if-else statement. So all this is going to do is to say, if name is not equal to Luke, then do this logic, else do this logic. And that's not, in this example, is not particularly useful, but you can imagine that this could be very useful in more convoluted cases. And we can do that with this inside here, and we can do it from here. We can flip it back, and we can flip it back from down here. So this is, a kind of convoluted way of doing that. But the other thing we can do, which is slightly more useful, but again, not brilliantly useful in this case, is to, if we flip this again, then what we can do is we can use the simplify if refactoring to actually turn this into a ternary. Now, this isn't a bad ternary right here, actually. This isn't a bad ternary at all. But if we continue to simplify these ifs, we get this huge, long, unreadable ternary that I'm not particularly fond of, because who is going to be able to glance at this piece of code and figure out exactly what's going on here? This isn't a really good time for using this refactoring. But when you've got simple ifs and you really, I do tend to write things as an if first and then convert it to a ternary after when I think, this could actually be a ternary instead of needing to be an if. So this is a really useful refactoring for that. And then if we go right back to the original code, I'm just using undo, which is Command Z. I can highlight over the if, and then I can do what would be my favorite refactor for this small piece of code, which is replace it to a switch, because this is now much more readable as a switch, even than it was as a load of else statements. So that's a few ways that we can refactor if statements using the new intentions in 2016.1. There's a question which is cool, which whilst is a nice statement, thank you very much, isn't really a question. So we'll move on. So, there's a question which is a very good question, which I will actually answer. Let's go right back to where we were. Yeah, you can go from a ternary back to an if, and you can also go from a switch back to an if you want to. These work both ways. So we need to flip that before I can simplify it. Now, obviously, it's not as simple as going backwards is actually not as easy as it looks looking at it. In this instance, I can't go backwards because it can't figure out how it should go backwards. But if this was a much simpler ternary, it would actually give me the intention. Okay, so next we've got better trait support in PHPStorm 2016.1. There's kind of two ways that we've introduced better trait support. The first is I'm not going to demo, and it's to do with we've introduced a few annotations, doc block annotations that allow you to tell when you're coding a trait, tell it the class it's going to be used in, so you can get code completion on things like this. I'm not actually a big fan of that, which is why I'm not going to demo it, because I think that when you're writing traits, you should write them independent of the classes that are going to use them, which is the whole point of a trait. But, it was a feature that was requested by a number of people, and so it's been implemented. As I say, not particularly my cup of tea, but yeah, some people will find some use for that. But what I do like is the new code completion, the new code completion around traits. So let's take a look. So if we get rid of a class here and recode that, we've just got two traits here, just two very simple traits. And previously we didn't have great code completion when we were using them. So if we just create a class here called a class, and then if we import a few traits, we can use trait 1. And we've always had code completion here, just as a point of note. But what we haven't had code completion is around is if you want to use the instead of functionality, where you want to kind of tell PHP the precedence that each trait should have. So I can use control space here to actually get code completion now inside of the use statement. So I want to use some method, which is obviously inside both of those traits, instead of, if I can type, instead of trait 1. So we've got more code completion inside complex, what I would call complex use of traits. I'm not a big fan of this kind of thing either, personally, but I can understand that some people need to use traits in this way. The other thing we can do is there's a second way that you can actually reference this exact same code. So we can say use trait2 : some method instead of trait 1, which again is valid, but we get code completion in the both ways that we can define which methods from these two traits to use when they clash. Okie dokie. So that's the crux of what we've done inside the PHP language improvements. If you look at the release notes on the website, you'll see a little bit more information about these things. So next up, we've done some debugger improvements, and the first thing we've done is improvements around the zero configuration debugger. The zero configuration debugger is an evolved piece of work that we've been working on for a number of years, where the PhpStorm is really trying to take the pain out of configuring your debugging environment inside of PhpStorm. So it's been going on for a few years. I actually didn't realize when I went through this run through that this is a function of PhpStorm that's actually been around for over 4 years. So it's been around for a long time, but it's definitely been another case of incremental updates where we've incrementally improved this zero configuration debugger experience. And in PhpStorm 2016.1, there's been a number of improvements, really massively around sort of remote debug situations. For example, when you're using a vagrant box or your development environment isn't on the machine you're actually coding on. So there's some better detection of these remote debug situations where PhpStorm tries to infer more debug configuration from the configuration of your web server. And it includes connections versus command line, because command line and zero configuration debugging and vagrant have never been playing as well as they should have, and they're definitely playing better together in this release. Particularly over an SSH tunnel. If you use an SSH tunnel to connect to your remote debug environment, you'll be happy to know that you'll have some better detection and better zero configuration debugging in this release. Also important is that there's been more verbose error messages added during configuration problems. So if PhpStorm's struggling to infer your debugger configuration from your environment, it should give you more helpful error messages now to help you solve this problem yourself. Certainly as important, but much cooler and much easier for me to talk about and demonstrate, is the support for debugging in the REST client. A lot of people don't even realize there is a built-in REST client in PhpStorm. You know, when you want to test and to demonstrate your REST client, your RESTful API, you can use the built-in REST client in PhpStorm to do this. And now we've got support for one-click debugging inside the REST client, as well as everything else. So I can actually demo this, so let's do it. So let's open a project that is a RESTful API. Excuse me. My throat's going already. Here we go. So this is joined in. This is a API for joined in. Joined in is a completely open source project that is used for rating speakers and talks at conferences. Really useful for me because it's completely RESTful and it's an open source project. Therefore, I can easily demonstrate it. So let's just check we've got a web server running here, which we do. I can now close this. So to open the RESTful API, we go to Tools and Test RESTful Web Service, and that opens our nice little REST client right here from within the IDE, which is kind of cool. And then I already have this set up. So this web server is running on localhost 8081 and version 2.1 events, which is nice. And then if I click play, you can see that I've got a result back right here. Everything seems to be looking good. We can format it nice and easy as well, which I think looks a lot better than just the whole string of JSON. But what's been introduced into PhpStorm 2016.1 is this submit request in debug mode. So if you use step debugging inside of PhpStorm, you'll be familiar with this. If you don't, you really, really should. I think there's a talk I gave at PHP UK on YouTube. Just search for PHP UK and PhpStorm and debugging, and you should find that talk, which will give you a nice introduction onto why you should use it. But really what we may want to do here is to say, okay, something's going wrong here. The router isn't particularly working how I like. This is just the index.php file. like most frameworks, this API uses a single file to dispatch all requests. So I'm just going to set a breakpoint inside of this index.php, and let's set a breakpoint just before we create this router, and then let's step debug over this API call to see exactly what's happening. So I can just hit submit request in debug mode, and you can see I don't even need to mess about saying, can you listen for the connection or do any of that stuff like you would need to do in other environments. This just works for me. So you can see we get our normal debugging, we get our normal cool comments that come up in PHPStorm when we're step debugging. Okay, so the route has been created, great. We can see the configuration here. We can browse down the router to find the route name. If we wanted to from right within here, oh, it's version 2.1, and there's some rules that's been created. We can continue to step as you would from any other kind of situation when you're using the step debugger. But now you can do it right from within the RESTful client, which is all has been possible before, but not in a single click. So that's pretty cool. I must remember to stop this session, or that will almost certainly come back and bite me later on in this demo. Any questions around the REST debugger or anything that we've spoken about so far? No? Super duper. So yeah, next we've introduced a number of improvements and changes around the frameworks and tools. So if you work with remote connections, if you edit locally and upload your changes to sorry, I was reading a question. If you work with remote connections, you will know that while PHPStorm works beautifully in that environment, you can edit locally and it'll automatically upload on save and do all these really nice things. It's always been a bit sluggish previously, which the reason for that is because PHPStorm has been closing each FTP or SSH or SFTP connection between every single upload, or between every single action is the word I'm looking for. So what's happened is in this most recent version, we've added new Keep Alive for remote connections, which is really, really cool. Sorry, Kevin, do you mean the REST debug, the REST client? There was an issue with putting the URL in the query string. Yes, I don't know the answer to that, to be perfectly honest, but what I'll do is I'll find out the answer and I'll tweet it at you. I'll tweet it out on my account, and I'll get the @PHPStorm account to retweet that, so we'll get an answer. So let me make a note of that. Excuse me. Talk amongst yourselves. There we go. Okay, so the new Keep Alive feature basically has been introduced, which means that when you're doing a lot of actions from within PHPStorm and you're interacting with the remote server a lot, you don't want to be closing the connection and opening it up after every action. It's actually enabled by default. So we'll take a quick look at, okay. We'll take a quick look. There we go. So let's find a project that has configuration there. Yeah, this one does. So we'll take a quick look at how you can change that. As I said, it is actually going to be turned on by default. Oh, this is not the right place. Excuse me. It's in deployment. So tools, deployment, configuration. So you can see we've got a really basic and also fake FTP setup here, but if you go to advanced options, you can see that these new advanced options have been set up. So in the default, any remote connection now by default will send a Keep Alive message every 300 seconds, and it'll send an NOOP message every 300 seconds. You can edit this, you can change that to every minute, and can we use a list command instead? Whatever you need to do to keep this command alive with your SFTP, SSH connection, whatever, you can easily do that now. So yeah, we can mess around with this to make sure that we can tweak the Keep Alive so that it's not sending too many things, but it's not sending too little. just to repeat myself, and I know I am, this is turned on by default in 2016.1, and it defaults to every 5 minutes and to an NOOP. So just be aware of that if you're using remote connections. You may see a little more traffic over the network than you're expecting. So the other thing that we've done is I'm going to introduce two things together because they're pretty much in the same place, is we've introduced project level interpreters. So interpreters configuration has always been global previous to 2016.1, which can be a pain, and I'll show you why. But in 2016.1, you can mark a PHP interpreter as being just to be used in this project, and also improve configuration for path mappings, move the place the path mappings are set to a more logical place. So rather than being in deployments, they're in the interpreter now. Easier if I actually show this than talk about it. So let's go straight back to this project that we were in previously, and let's go to our settings in PHP. And you can see here that I'm using 5.6. I've just gone to settings, languages and frameworks, PHP. Nice and easy to find. So this is where we tell PhpStorm which interpreter you're using, which PHP executable, which version of PHP you're using. Typically, you may, if you work like I work, you may have like tons of Vagrant boxes. Each of your projects will have a little Vagrant box that you use for development on. And so when you go to list all of the configured interpreters in PhpStorm, you may see a load of these remote PHP settings all the way down here because you work with 10, 20 Vagrant boxes, and all of them are listed down here. And none of them are useful except for within the project that you wish to use them in. So for example, if I uncheck what is the new checkbox and then, oh, I really shouldn't have cancelled that because I wanted to save it. If I uncheck that and then apply and then go to OK and OK, if we move to a different project, yeah, let's see, API joined in will be fine. And if we go here, to the same thing, and if we select here, you can see my Vagrant configuration for a completely different project from within another project, and there's no way that this is useful in here, which is why we've implemented this project level interpreter. And it's easy enough to turn on. You've just seen me turn it off. We just go here and we say visible for only this project, and now when I go back to any other projects, they can't see this, so it removes all of the clutter around interpreters. You may have noticed the second part of this, if I go back here, is that we've got this new path mappings drop down right here from within the interpreter, so we no longer have to go through deployments and all the convoluted stuff to tell PhpStorm how to map the local files to the remote files. This is set up right here and in here, and you can see it's quick and easy for me to see the project root of this maps to /vagrant on the Vagrant box, which is the typical configuration. We can add, I knew that was going to take a second, so I took a chance to take a drink. We can change that by just clicking the ... We can add more custom mappings, remove things, exactly the same as we can before, but everything's more logical right here. And this is across the toolbox as well. So if you use more than one project, everything will be in a similar place now. So that really should help. Any questions? No? Cool. Yes, this, if you were going to ask me what I thought my absolute favorite improvement was in 2016.1, and if you really pushed me, I think this is what I would say: the new rerun fail tests button for PHPUnit and bhat. So again, a lot of people don't actually realize that. There's a question: are there any videos on remote interpreters to better understand how this works? If I'm perfectly honest, I don't know. I certainly haven't done any, but I've only been working in PHP for PhpStorm for a year, so I don't know again, Kevin. I'm sorry. It seems to me that every question you ask, I have to say I don't know. But if there isn't, I'm happy to put a write a blog or maybe a video myself. I can definitely put that on my list. Again, you're going to have to bear with me while I write that down. Remote interpreters. I'm sure we can, at the very least, write a blog post. So, getting back to rerun fail test, I can answer David Eddy's question right there. Codeception uses PHPUnit. PhpStorm supports PHPUnit. Therefore, there's no reason why codeception tests can't be run right from within PhpStorm's code runner. So if you weren't aware of the fact that PhpStorm has its own PHPUnit and Behat test runner, this is going to be a really cool demonstration. If you already use PhpStorm's PHPUnit test runner, this is going to be a really, really big win. This is really, really useful. So let's take a look. I'm going to pick a project that has a ton of unit tests. And this is ZenFeed. This is one of the components from Zen Framework. It's a fairly simple, believe it or not, this is a fairly simple component, but it has so many use cases that there's a ton of tests. This is one class. In fact, if I quickly show you how this is configured, because if you don't use the test runner, this will be of interest to you. Basically, all I've done is to click plus to add a new run configuration and then select PHPUnit. And then we get this little box here. I've just given it a name, PHPUnit tests, nice and easy. And the test scope, basically most components or even your own project has a PHPUnit.xml file that tells PHPUnit which tests to run and where they are and anything else. So I tend to use, rather than the scope being a directory or a class or method, I tend to use defined in the configuration file and then just browse the configuration file to tell PhpStorm which configuration file to use. If you use any custom test runner options, any dashes, you can stick those in there. If you need to tell the command line, any specific options, you can do it here. But really, all I've done here is give this a name and tell it which PHPUnit XML file to use. That's it. Sorry if you've used this test runner before, this is going to be boring, but I think there's a few people who haven't. So we go back to OK. And now what we can do is we can click play to run this configuration. And you can see that the tests are running. Everything's green. This bar will turn to red as soon as it hits a failed test. But you can see there's 1,409 tests, of which 21 have been ignored. I haven't got extensions installed or something's not right, so the tests have been ignored. These buttons here let us filter the tests. So at the moment, I'm only showing ignored. Sorry, at the moment I'm showing nothing. I can click on that button to show the ignored. I can click on that one to show the passed. So there's all the test files right there. More interestingly is if we now get a failed test. So I'm going to literally pick a random test from within here. Let's pick this one, like totally off the top of my head. And let's pick a random test. This is just a nice tree to browse your tests. So this is the file and these are the individual tests. Let's do test get source. It takes me right to the test if I double click on it in the code. And let's add a failing test. So this assert true, false. So this is now going to fail. And if let's turn these filters off so we get nothing in here and rerun, and we run the tests again. Here we go. We should now get a failed test. This should go red at some point. There we go. It's failed. And you can see because I've got these filters turned off, we only get the failed test here. If I wasn't inside this file, I can do double click to take me right to the line that's failed, which is really, really cool. If you use big test suites, this is really, really useful. But the most important thing in 2016.1 is this little button here, rerun failed tests. If I hit that, PhpStorm's only going to run the failed test. So that took 20 milliseconds instead of the 8 seconds it took to run the entire test suite last time. So let's see if I can try and fix this. Okay, this needs to be true. Let's change it to true and rerun failed tests. Oh, no, that still fails. Oh, okay, it's a string true. It should be true. rerun fail test. All tests pass. So we've rerun the fail test instead of running the entire test suite, which is super cool and really easy. Notice it's now disabled because all of our tests are passed. Any questions around the test handler, the test runner? Nope. So either I'm doing a really good job of explaining this, or nobody's really listening. But either way, we can move on, which is nice. So there's been some new support added. I'll go through a couple of these, but I won't go through them all. Right to left languages, which is really, really nice if you work with right to left languages, Hebrew or other similar right to left languages. We now support those inside the IDE, which I guess will be a godsend for some people. JavaScript, there's been some new support thanks to our team, our friends in the WebStorm team. Just a point of note, PhpStorm contains all of the functionality of WebStorm plus PHP support. I don't know if you need to turn some of them on or off, but it definitely comes bundled. So we've now got support for Angular 2, TypeScript. There's been some improvements around the JavaScript debugger. So if you use those, you should see some improvements. There's been some improved Docker support. I've only recently started using Docker, but this really looks like it's a definite step forward. You need to, if you work with Docker and you want to have integration inside the IDE, you'll definitely need to use this. You need to install and enable the plugin, but once you do, you can see that if I move to a project that has Docker support, here we go. So this is all running. I've deliberately done this because I want to give you folks a nice, easy way to see what's going on. But if you can see, so we've got a container running here. Now, we've got some new tabs, which is nice. So we've got properties and environment variables, port bindings, and volume bindings. So we can now see exactly what's configured inside this Docker container right from within PhpStorm. We've also got a list of the images that are available, which again is nice, because we can actually highlight one and start a container, create a container right within the IDE. We can also run these containers that are already configured, again, right from within the IDE, which is kind of neat. So these are images with no configured containers, so we can create containers. These are already configured containers. I can just start them. Really nice if you use these kind of things. And the other thing is there's support for Docker Machine. So if you use Docker Machine and you then need to configure PhpStorm, you can literally just import your credentials straight from within Docker Machine, which is kind of nice. I don't know if this is going to work. Yes, it is. So it's running. So I can actually use PhpStorm to detect all of my configuration around Docker right from within the IDE, which is nice. We've improved some version control integration, not massively around Git, which I guess is the 90% use case these days. The Git integration was already fairly tight and fairly strong. So the version control integrations have been more around older, whether you can call Subversion an older version control system. I guess you can these days. So nothing really huge around Git and the 90% use case, but some people may be interested to read that. It's in the release notes. There's a new Joomla plugin. Now, possibly I would have liked to have covered this a little bit more in this webinar, but to be honest, I only found out about it at the last minute. So what I'll definitely be doing is a separate video or blog post, probably a video around the new Joomla plugin. I'm pretty excited to see what this holds. So if you're working with Joomla, you definitely check that out. Again, we'll tweet or blog about it once that comes around. There's also been some nice database improvements from DataGrip. DataGrip is our new standalone product that basically is an IDE for working with MySQL, Postgres, whatever, the database browser effectively. We get a lot, in fact, nearly all of DataGrip's functionality for free inside PhpStorm. And excuse me, not the improvements we've had we get for free once DataGrip introduce them into their product. We kind of get some nice things for free. In this specific excuse me. In this specific update, we had some pretty cool things. You need a project with a database configured. There we go. We already have one. So if you don't use the database browser, it's right here on the side. You can open it up. You can easily add a new data source to browse. Some of the cool things here. Note, if you've used this before, you'll notice that you have Postgres, I call it. I have no idea if that's correct, but that's what we'll say. So we've got Postgres support, and we've also got SQL Server support, which is kind of cool for some people. I know that's been genuinely a requested thing in the DataGrip, which is really nice. And there's also a couple of new features. Excuse me. There's also a couple of new features. So, for example, if we right-click on country and then go to table editor, excuse me. Hopefully I got that right. I did. So you can see you can browse the actual data inside this table, but you can also modify table, which gives us the schema. And we've added support for comments. You previously couldn't actually add or view comments in here. So we can say countries of the world unite. And you can see here we get a preview of exactly what SQL is going to be run against the database, and we can execute that. This also works at column level. So modify column, use the ... and add a new comment. The number of people is the population, and you can see we get the update here, and we can then choose to execute that if we want. And the other thing that's been added is under tools, you can now truncate the data inside a table. I'm not going to do that here, just because I can't be bothered to re-import all this data. But in development, that is kind of useful to be able to empty a table right there from within your IDE. It's another thing that you don't need to come out of your IDE to do. I know that I've worked in positions and projects where having to empty an entire table, I kind of needed to do that periodically. So that's kind of a useful tool. There's a question, is there a way to create a database in PhpStorm? I don't think so, no. I think that you already have to have created the database and created the user and the everything around that before you can actually connect to it from within PhpStorm. This is where I possibly could be proven completely wrong. Because I got to be perfectly honest with you, I am not 100% certain, but I don't believe that you can actually create a database. I'd be interested to know if I'm wrong. Tweet me if I've told complete fibs there. Okay, so yep. So that kind of covers the majority of what we've introduced in PhpStorm 2016.1. You can download a trial version from jetbrains.com/phpstorm. Obviously, it's a 30-day trial. I noticed a couple of people in this webinar have said that they've installed the trial version and it's expired. If you would like to retry the trial, drop me a tweet and I'll see what I can do. I'm not promising anything, but I'm sure that we can make an effort to try and get you an extra trial. Again, any questions, anything you want, you can tweet at PhpStorm, or you can tweet directly at me at GWH, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm just going to quickly scan through the questions again before we finish up. I believe the first question I can easily answer is Johnny Bradley. Were I using 2016.1.1? I believe I was using 2016. 1.1, and yes, I was using 2016.1.1. So that's an easy one to answer. So that'll be answered first. You don't see the refactor to switch action on my local. Oh, okay. I think that came in 2016.1.0, but maybe it didn't. Maybe it came in 0.1. Any of the other questions here are a little bit too in depth for me to particularly answer straight away. I don't know the answer to the automatic copy upload question. I'll try and get an email sent to you if we can answer that. If we can't, I apologize. But yep, I think that pretty much covers all of the questions. Unless there's any more, then we'll finish up. So again, oh, hello. Okay, you can have the PhpStorm splash screen open. Again, please drop me a tweet if you need anything, if you just want to chat, if you could do with some help. I'm happy to reply to as many as I can. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand you back to Anna.
So thank you, Gary, for the great presentation. I think it was very nice. And if there are still questions we didn't ask, we will ask them later by email. So if you want to learn more about PhpStorm, please visit our webpage. You can leave your feedback to Gary or to PhpStorm on Twitter. This recording will be available very soon. We will post about this in our blog post, and it will be available in JetBrains TV. So follow us and see you the next webinar.